is Pavel Lapere, and I'm an ecosystem builder out of Baltimore, Maryland.
My name is David Ponraj, and I am the founder of Startup Space.
My name is Christine Lai, and I am honored to serve as an ESHIP community activator.
My name is Joey. I'm with the Air Force Innovation Community, AFWorks.
Charles Ross. I'm with the International Business Innovation Association.
My name is Melissa Bradley. I'm in Washington, D.C. and proud to be part of 1863 Ventures.
My name is Jose Alvarez, and I am part of the Charlotte, North Carolina community.
Lars Kruger, Boise, Idaho.
I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Yeah, I'm in Detroit, Michigan.
My name is Cecilia Wessinger, and I'm an ESHIP community activator.
Hello, I'd like to welcome you to the 2020 ESHIP Summit. My name is Andy Soul. I'm a Senior Program Officer in the Entrepreneurship Department at the Kauffman Foundation, and I'll be your MC and guide over the next 2 days as we take a journey and look at how we build more inclusive, equitable, entrepreneurial-focused communities. I'd like to welcome you today, along with 800 folks from across all 50 states, DC, Puerto Rico, and over 20 countries. We've got folks coming in from big cities and little cities. We got people coming in from busy metropolises and quiet rural settings, and we're excited that you're here. We have lots of people that have been with us through the 4 years of this journey. This is the 4th ESHIP Summit and our first virtual interactive experience. For those of you who are new, we welcome you for the first time to join us, and we assure you, you are in luck for a fantastic experience and the opportunity to meet folks from across the country and around the globe. For those of you who are joining us inside the virtual conference platform, there's a lot of opportunities for you to interact with folks that are attending the conference with you. For those of us joining on the YouTube streams, you can engage in our interactive content by using Twitter. You want to use the hashtag ESHIPSummit. So for those of you inside our virtual platform, I want to give you a quick orientation to help you find your way around over the course of the next 2 days. On your screen, you will see tabs for chat, polls, and participants. The chat is an opportunity for you to communicate with other people in the sessions that you are currently attending. The polls will be asking questions that you can interact with myself as well as others in our sessions. And then the participants list will actually help you see and connect with others who are online with you. We'll be interacting with you through those methods. So first, let's practice. Let's get this interactive part started. So in the chat function, I want you to find the chat tab on your platform. And I want you to share with us what community you're representing and what organization you're representing. So tell us what organization and what community or what town you're joining us from today. So it looks like we've got Aaron from Albuquerque, Hassan from Detroit, Azira all the way from. Yaya is zooming in from Africa. That's fantastic. Michelle from Durham, Aaron from Alaska. We've got a ton of folks joining us today for our conversation as we explore entrepreneurial ecosystem building as a key and important element as we build and develop our communities. So if you look above, if you're inside of our platform, you will see a menu that has a couple options. The agenda is obviously where you can find the agenda for the next 2 days. There's a feature called My Agenda where you can build a customized agenda out of the sessions you hope to attend. The Resource Expo menu is a rich platform that has resources from over 50 organizations, national and global, that can provide tools, programs, practices, and support as you are trying to build your entrepreneurial ecosystems in your community. The Connect tab has a bunch of options for you to connect both with me as well as fellow participants in the event. And the Fun tab is exactly what it says. It's fun, and I'll let you explore that. For those of you who are joining today that may need closed captioning we have that option on the platform, but you'll need to reach out to our help desk. So in the upper corner of the platform, you will see a help menu, and you can reach out through a live help desk to get that set up. For those who need help on any other issues, that help desk is open throughout the event, and you can interact one-on-one with our conference support staff to help you make sure you have a great experience. So before I introduce our first guest, I want to hear from you. We've practiced the chat, now I want to practice the poll feature. So in the poll feature, I want you to go to the first question, and I want you to tell me how you were arriving today. But let's do it in one word. How are you arriving at this virtual event, in this conversation with me today in one word? So for me, my answer is energized, because to have the opportunity to connect with you and to talk about the work that we've been doing in this ESHIP community, through the work that I'm doing at the Kaufman Foundation to create more equitable and inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystems, that fires me up, that gets me energized. So I would say energized. Share how you're arriving today in that first poll. Now I'd like to welcome our first guest to have her join our conversation. I'd like to welcome the president and CEO of the Kaufman Foundation. She is a proud Midwesterner. We both hail from the state of Nebraska, and she has just entered her 20th year of service to the Kaufman Foundation. And it gives me great pride to introduce the CEO and the president of the Kaufman Foundation, Wendy Gillis, who's going to share a little bit more about why we're hosting this event. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you, Andy, and good morning, everyone. I sure wish we could all be together in Kansas City, but I'm still really excited to officially welcome you to the 2020 ESHIP Summit. First, I just want to say thank you. We are truly living in overwhelming times, and I sincerely appreciate you being here with us today. Despite the daily news, the devastating impacts of COVID-19, and a series of racial injustices that have exposed many of our systems as broken, flawed, and racist, we should hang on to hope, because we have before us an opportunity to create lasting change. The road to progress is often filled with barriers both seen and unseen. Every system deserves a thorough examination, and this exercise must be done with both humility and determination to rebuild what doesn't equitably serve us all. I'm going to touch on that in just a minute, but first thought I'd give you a little insight into our founder, Mr. Kaufman. Ewing Kaufman, the donor of our foundation, was a great entrepreneur who was centered, practical, and resilient. He was born a Missouri farm boy, poor. He grew up poor, and he died a billionaire. He founded a major pharmaceutical company called Marion Laboratories, which years later is merged into a much larger firm. He also founded the Kansas City Royals, which won a World Series on his watch. So that's a little bit about who Mr. Kaufman was. But what did he believe? Because his principles guide us today. He believed that everyone deserves a shot at success, regardless of race, income, or background. He believed that we can fundamentally change the outcomes of people's lives by tackling root causes, not just addressing symptoms. That education is paramount to helping people reach their full potential. That building enterprise is one of the most effective ways to realize individual promise and spur the economy. And finally, he believed that common people like himself could do uncommon things. Our communities, our country, and our world are full of common men and women capable of doing uncommon things to create a better future. And we're going to need them to do it, because if there was ever a time to be uncommon, this is it. In carrying out Mr. Kaufman's mission, we seek to prepare all people for success in their jobs and careers as employees or as entrepreneurs. Our work is grounded in the principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'll briefly outline some of the challenges we're trying to address. COVID-19 didn't destroy a golden age of entrepreneurship, because unfortunately, we had a problem even before the pandemic. By the indicators we track at the Kaufman Foundation, such as new business starts, American entrepreneurship has been flat for the past couple of decades. In addition, first-year job creation by startups averages about 5.27 jobs per 1,000 adults nationally. But back in the late 1990s, that number was around 8 jobs per 1,000. So the takeaway here is that fewer companies are starting and they're employing fewer people. Now, I wish I had the exact answer to why we're in this entrepreneurial slump. I don't. But through our research and our experience at the foundation, we can point to a couple problem areas that are contributing factors. First, we have an uneven playing field. Entrepreneurs face barriers that protect larger, established companies. And in addition, women, people of color, and those living in rural communities, in rural and small towns, face higher barriers and don't often have access to the tools and connections they need to get their businesses off the ground. Second, we had a global pandemic and economic crisis into the mix, and now we have new and small companies at extreme risk. We're seeing that even more so with businesses run by people of color, by women, and again, those living in rural America. As just one example, it's been reported that more than 40% of Black-owned businesses have closed so far during the pandemic. A third problem is that in both the short and long term, we have a talent pipeline issue. Our education systems simply aren't well aligned to support what students need now and in the future. Unfortunately, the majority of students aren't even completing 1 year of college. Now, that's not good for them, that's not good for higher education, and it's certainly not good for our workforce. Ultimately, our education systems need to provide more choices and experiences that position students for the real world. So, in this time of crisis, we need to change systems and rebuild better. Of course, we know that stabilizing the economy is the first and most important step right now. But then what? To rebuild better, we need a new ecosystem of entrepreneurship that is inclusive and equitable, and new learning pathways for students that position them for now and in the future. I'm going to end and wrap up where I started with some wise words of our founder. We know we can't do this work alone. The Kauffman Foundation's money can't do it alone, nor can philanthropy in general. The issues we face are far too big for any one organization or sector. And that's why all of you are so important. You're builders. And if we're going to rebuild a more inclusive and prosperous economy and society, we need ecosystem builders like you. Despite these turbulent times, or maybe precisely because of them, we need to continue this work together. We're here to support you, we're here to celebrate you, but most of all, we're here to thank you. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to your wonderful MC for the day, Andy Stoll.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Appreciate you sharing your remarks and for your leadership. So the ESHIP Summit, as I mentioned, this is not our first one. The ESHIP Summit journey actually began in 2017 as an effort to accelerate entrepreneurial ecosystem building as an emerging and important aspect of economic, community, and entrepreneurial development. The journey began actually as a road trip, visiting entrepreneurs and ecosystem builders across America, and then we held our first event in 2017. Before we get into this year's event and this year's content and the conversations that I'm going to have with you, I want to take a look back where it all began. We've got a short video clip.
It's a situation, it's like driving in the fog. If you're driving in the fog, everybody slows down, but you can't stop. And you'd love to be able to see 50 feet ahead, but you can't see. So you see maybe 20 feet ahead. And that's kind of dangerous to drive when you can only see the next 20 feet. But if you don't drive a little bit, you will never see the next 20 feet.
Some of it is the emotional fear, the silent barriers. Some of it is, I can't pay my rent next month if I leave my job. So I can't leave my job. I will stay in my job.
It was truly a leap of faith for me to make this decision and start this company because there was so much on the line. Like, there were so many things that could have gone wrong. It started off really tough. In tech, it's very white male dominated. There's been harassment and different things that have happened over time. But I cannot let that stop me. I can't let that ruin things because so many people are depending on me.
There were nights I went to sleep so afraid of not even knowing what the next step should be. There were mornings I would walk past my computer, completely paralyzed by fear because I had no idea where to go next.
Entrepreneurs bring their entire selves to every single thing they do on a daily basis.
Entrepreneurs die deaths of a million cuts. They don't die from one blow of a hammer. All those little things they deal with day to day that get in the way of making a great business. And oftentimes they're psychological barriers, they're cultural barriers, or they're regulatory barriers.
Sometimes it's like being in a maze. They're trying to find an answer, trying to find a solution. Everyone's told them they've got a great idea. At some point, they either run out of energy and give up, or they get lucky and succeed.
I got rejected repeatedly for a year and a half. And at that point, I'm really wondering if I am crazy. Like, I feel like I'm crazy.
We'd made some major missteps. distribution deals evaporated overnight. So we were suddenly in this situation where we had an extreme capital outlay, had a lot of overhead, and lost half our revenue.
It's a different kind of stress, I guess, too, because when you have a startup and you're growing a business, I mean, you know, everything you have is on the line.
Every banker we had, every accountant we had, every lawyer we had advised our family, shut it down. It's not gonna work. And we just didn't take no for an answer. This is a family institution, and it will go on.
Real entrepreneurship, the vast majority of businesses are just people doing day-to-day stuff, putting one foot in front of the other, just trying to make things work. There are people doing amazing things in their communities. Part of the role of people that support entrepreneurs is to recognize that heroism.
In a great ecosystem, people help each other. They say, you know what, I know someone that can help you open that door. That ability to get information fast and support one another through that mutual network is really what allows people to overcome barriers.
We see too much disconnection, we see too many blind spots, we see too much segregation, frankly, and just not enough effectiveness in the ecosystems.
In our ecosystem, what specifically was missing was that opportunity for inclusivity and idea and industry agnostic approaches to supporting people who want to launch and grow something, who want to take an idea and manifest that idea. In our ecosystem, there are lots of silos.
Part of why it hasn't happened is because the parties haven't found each other. We're looking at ways to do that and remove the systemic barriers that could be in place that stand in the way of those people starting the businesses and finding the resources that they need. So we need to create better pathways to succeed.
Everyone plays a role in the success of an entrepreneur. Even if you're not an entrepreneur, I think that you understand the richness and the value of entrepreneurship in your community.
If innovation and entrepreneurship thrive from ways of thinking and ways of being, then there's really no inherent reason why you can't replicate that everywhere. It really starts to change the game when you think of it less as a method attached to one particular type of place to a method that any individual can act upon. That actually starts to change the way that individuals relate to their communities and also changes communities so people feel empowered.
We have to continue to listen, and the way we listen is through convening and reconvening to learn what's changing in the hero's journey. What's the new barrier in the way?
Welcome, Victor Wong.
I sincerely believe that the people here in this room today have the ability to change the trajectory of human history.
Nelson Mandela said something I'll never forget, which is, it always seems impossible until it happens.
ESHIP Summit was really built around the idea of, could we find people from across the country of different backgrounds and industries and races and genders and communities and bring them together to talk about what they're doing. And what I think was achieved at the ESHIP Summit was the affirmation that happened amongst those people, that the work that they're doing isn't some one-off thing, and that it is actually a changing economy in the US that's emerging a new role, a new position, this new idea of a person whose entire job is to focus on the system.
Ideally, in 2025, you would be able to get a degree in becoming an ecosystem facilitator. It would become a profession, and they would be embedded into every business, much like a lawyer or an accountant.
The best way to empower the makers, doers, and the dreamers is by giving them the environments in which to thrive, which depend entirely on the people that surround them.
We wanted to legitimize the profession of ecosystem building and co-create tools that you can start enacting in your communities right away. It's also about equality. It's about having an equal seat at the front table to make decisions about your business and about your efforts.
We oftentimes fail to realize that everyone has the opportunity to contribute, provided they've actually been given the chance to participate.
It represents all of you, regardless of demographic, regardless of geography. It's all of us.
Everybody in this room are folks that are kind of carving that new path, right? All of those resources and other folks that are kind of putting time, effort, and energy into helping us along as ecosystem builders is huge. And I think that over time, we're going to see the results of that.
I think one of the great aspects of America is this deep resilience and the sense that, well, we can work it out. We can work with our friends, our colleagues, and our community members to find solutions to problems. These types of shared stories, peer learning experiences, groups and communities where people can feel bonded to each other to get through those hard times, that's so important to the entrepreneurial spirit.
I'd like to welcome to our conversation my colleague, my collaborator, and my boss, the Vice President of Entrepreneurship, Philip Gaskin, who is coming to us from the Kauffman Foundation. Philip, it's really fun to look back at where we've come from watching that video. So much has happened since then. As you look at those images and think back, now that you're in the helm of our program, what reflections do you have looking at some of those images?
Andy, thanks, and so great to be here. Hello, everyone out there. The first thing I think about is that the only time as you wear sport jackets is during ESHIP Summit. But I think back to you yourself, Victor. We all sat in the room together and just said, let's do this. Let's create a community of practice where ecosystem builders can come and self-identify, share best practices, have a supportive community for this emerging field of entrepreneurial ecosystem building. Ecosystem building is not anything new. It's been going on for years. Entrepreneurial ecosystem building is much newer and emerging. And, I think what we've been able to achieve in that time is giving people a voice and a seat at the table. And not all of us have had a seat at the table in this form of economic development that we're doing, and being able to bridge everyone working in economic development and ecosystem building together has been one of the pleasures when I sort of look back and look at it all.
You look back at that video and you think how much has changed since 2017. That wasn't so long ago. 2020 alone has been what feels like 2 decades of change. What is the challenge as you look at where we're at today in 2020? What is the challenge we face?
Well, expanding on what Wendy presented to us, there's been progress over time in people overcoming barriers, but not nearly enough, and too many people are left out. And I'm someone who's lived through division and discrimination from an early age. I'll tell you a quick story here. I think from a capital perspective, but when I was a kid, my dad and I were very close, and we used to go everywhere together. And one of the places we always used to go was the bank. We went to the bank, and but I noticed we went to a lot of different banks. And finally, one day I said to him, Daddy, why are we going to so many banks? And he said, I'll tell you when you get older. And the reason was because it took him 4 years to be seen as viable enough to get a loan to open his business. It was because of his credit score was a few points too low. It was because of the zip code we lived in. It was because of the color of his skin. Those things are happening today. Whether that's in rural, in urban edge, in urban wherever. And so systems are still fragmented and disconnected. So we have to look at, from a systems connection perspective, that's a capital example of capital and credit systems being disconnected. There's the entrepreneurial ecosystem that we're all working on, education, healthcare, all of those. Too many of us are still left out, and why we've tried to do our best as individuals. And that's it's a challenge, and we see this obviously, currently in the last 4 months.
That's a lot of people are asking. What do we do as leaders in this moment? What do you see from your vantage point? What's our choice right now?
Now, we can choice. We can stay disconnected and suffer, or we can work together to fix and repair broken systems. But the only way to do that is all of us working together. And we have a tendency as a society to when there's a challenge, we come together, and we rally around. whether it's 9/11, Great Recession, what have you. Now is it rally around, and then we fall. This tendency to fall back apart, and when we fall back apart, what happens between one tragedy to the next is inequities just keep growing. Because we get back into it, and the stock market's going up, and people, all these false signals of progress, and inequities are still growing. And so, we have to come together and work on systems change, and is what we're doing, in this community of practice. And that's what gets me out of it and drives me every morning. And this moment comes from my experience of who I am, along with everyone, to make that change.
You've spent your career working on how to bring people together as a community organizer, and your role helping social entrepreneurs, and now your role at the Kauffman Foundation. If we can bring people to work together on these really challenging and complex problems, what does the world look like?
Well, the simple is the reverse of all the issues that we've laid out is those going away. Imagine that. When people say, "Hey, where are we going? What do you think in the next 5 years? Where are we in the next 10 years?" We've got a lot of examples of what we need to change and create so that create a better and fairer shot for people to have a seat at the table. And this is following the data. This is about economic survival, economic viability, and sustainability of the U.S. economy. If more and more people can't get into the game to start a job and then grow it in order to then employ people who will then have money in the economy, we're going to be in bad shape, worse than we are already. So we've got to look at the whole system to become more aligned. We've got to move from being disconnected to connected. And ecosystem building is that pathway.
So if we're, thinking about ecosystem building, you mentioned earlier that it's an emerging practice and profession. We're talking about entrepreneurial ecosystem building here. Looking ahead, what is the Kauffman Foundation, and what are we as a team going to do to support that? And then do you have any advice for folks, this is your 4th summit, obviously, as well. What advice do you have for people attending the summit to make the most of the opportunity we're trying to serve up here with this interactive event?
Well, yeah, Kauffman Foundation, our strategy in entrepreneurship is a systems change-based strategy. And so, we're in this understanding the work that needs to be done, and we're going to keep plowing and keep on going. So we're here with everyone. Through our programs, our policy, our research, our entrepreneurial learning and support, our capital access programs, everything that we're working on, we're looking at reducing it, trying to eliminate, working alongside with everyone else, those systemic barriers that just get in the way. Real change starts, and sorry, there's a community organizer coming out of me. Real change starts at the ground level, starts in the community. This is bottom up, door to door, understanding each other and being able to relate and work more interdependently. Advice, look, be authentic, show up. Tell your personal story, like we've been saying. Learn other people's stories. Ask them to join you. It's block by block. And so, going into the next 2 days, especially the next 2 days, and just keep this in mind, understand your value, understand the power that we all have when it comes to what we can do in changing communities. You bring a lot to the conversation. I'm so thrilled to see this year, we have professional economic development, ecosystem building, folks just starting out, everyone really coming together and understand what we mean all collectively. And so don't let others tell you otherwise. We got it. Let's get going. I'm ready.
Thank you so much, Philip, for your leadership and setting up today. We'll visit with you a little bit later in the program. Thanks for being here.
All right.
So throughout this summit, we'll be introducing to you a lot of people like Wendy and Philip, but thought leaders from outside the Kauffman Foundation. And each of the plenary sessions, we're going to invite a co-host who will help me get through the conversations and help it drive sort of our agenda, but to help bring different perspectives as well. So our first co-host for this first plenary session, I am so excited to introduce. You got a little clip of her earlier. I greatly admire her, Melissa Bradley, who's the co-founder of 1863 Ventures. Back in 2017, our first summit, she gave an unbelievable fire starter talk about the economic imperative and inclusion in entrepreneurship. Just lit the house on fire. Let's just watch a clip of what Melissa had to say.
These are myths, these are beliefs, these are opinions. No, these are truths. These are real barriers that I have with a graduate degree, an undergraduate degree, a privileged life. I face these aggressions every day. and so do those that are less privileged. If we are unwilling and unable to address the system inequalities, they will further contribute and result in accrued depreciation in our country. It is important for us to know that even if you're doing it well, like you check the box, you've got some people of color, you check the box, you know some gay people, check it more.
Melissa, welcome back to the ESHIP Summit stage. Just that clip gets me fired up. It's not even the whole talk. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a true pleasure. I appreciate it.
Look, I look at that video. That was 3 years ago. Obviously, a lot has happened. What's changed since 2017 from your vantage point?
You know, I wish I could say more has changed, but at least we've made some progress. You know, I am deeply grateful to be here today and deeply grateful for that opportunity. I would say that the first thing it did, starting immediately after that talk, was open up a series of conversations. People waited for me when I walked off the stage who said, I want to talk to you, and if not here, then later. And I followed up on all those conversations, and they were honest, open, transparent conversations of people wanting to figure out how can they expand the inclusion and diversity of their ecosystem. So that was just amazing, the vulnerability. I think certainly this year, which has been a doozy for 2020, I think that motivation continues. I'm not sure it's as heartfelt and honest and transparent, but you know, the inbound of really people trying to understand what does it mean to be a diverse entrepreneur has gone through the roof, and I'm grateful for that. I think the unfortunate part is that we haven't necessarily seen the investment, the supply chain opportunities and the partnerships advance as quickly as interest, but I'm hoping one day soon they will align.
Melissa, what I love about your sort of vantage point is you bring like 7 kinds of smoke. Like you're a serial entrepreneur, tech entrepreneur, you're a professor at Georgetown, you've started multiple ventures, and you help entrepreneurs every day through 1863 Ventures. So Melissa's going to join us throughout this opening session or plenary session and co-host with me and help get the conversation started. Thanks for being here. But this is so good and such a good setup. I just want to start talking to you, but let's make this more interesting by inviting a few other folks to weigh in on the discussion. So to kick off our first roundtable, this will be our roundtable on the state of entrepreneurship. I'm also going to bring in some of the people who inspire me every day, a number who've been mentors of mine, and I want to welcome Sammy, Scott, and Luz into the conversation, beaming in from all parts of the United States. Thanks for being here. Scott, I'm going to start with you. Scott, serial entrepreneur, currently the CEO of Upside. Nice product placement there on the t-shirt. Looking back, you know, you've helped co-found Priceline, the Network for Good. You were the founding CEO of the Startup America Partnership, which was an effort that really the ESHIP Summit is building on the foundation that built. Scott, you run your company. You probably mentor dozens, if not hundreds, of entrepreneurs. You're running an online virtual founders class through Upside. You're out talking to entrepreneurs every day. Well, maybe not out. You're virtually talking to entrepreneurs every day. What are you seeing on the ground? What's the state of entrepreneurship just based on the conversations you're having?
Thanks, Andy. Thank you for having me here. And I'm a big fan. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. While I bring technology to the table from an engineering standpoint, I always think about entrepreneurship as a key driver. And over the last 6 months or so, I think I've met one-on-one with about 150 entrepreneurs of all different types, folks who are just starting out to founders that are running scaled up companies. And I think there's a few things that are going on. First off, entrepreneurship, as it has been for centuries, is in America, is alive and well. Entrepreneurs are out there figuring it out every day. And while they continue to need support, nobody went into hiding. Everybody figured out how to buckle down. So I think they've gone through a few phases. I'd say March through probably June, everybody just needed to buckle down and figure out how to get through that period and get a little bit more visibility onto what was happening in the future. Now we're in a phase where it's saying, all right, how long will these various challenges last? And what's unique about this particular moment certainly in my life and probably in the last 100 years, is we've actually got 3 massive things all going on at once. It was kicked off by the pandemic, and so we had a health crisis. That created a compounding issue of an economic crisis. And then the kind of rampant underpinnings of racism and bias and bigotry that have been part of the foundation of our country forever have been elevated up to a level of consciousness that we haven't seen in probably 50 years. And those things are all happening at the same time to all of us as entrepreneurs. They're impacting every one of our employees, every one of our customers, every constituent we care about is being impacted in this moment in time. And so it's making the challenge of being an entrepreneur, which is already its own roller coaster ride in the dark, a whole nother level of challenge. And in particular, it's already hard no matter who you are, but for people of color, the health crisis has disproportionately impacted them. More Black-owned businesses have gone out of business than any other category. I think last time I saw it was about 40%. We are starting to see an uptick in that, but we've got a great reset that is happening right now. And the question that I keep turning to and that I'm spending time on is, how do we recover from this in a new way? How do we really elevate everybody up? And how do we reinvest in women-owned businesses and entrepreneurs and people of color so that after this recession and after this recovery, we have a different landscape and the distribution and the diversity of companies. And we've got some advantages that we're seeing. The fact that people have moved to remote work means people have greater opportunity to join companies they otherwise wouldn't be able to because they don't live in Washington, D.C. or in San Francisco or in New York or Boston. And that's changing things. People are moving back to places where they came from because they can work remotely. And I think that we're starting to see the beginnings of a potential major shift in the way that entrepreneurship is conducted. And even all of this, in the years past, we'd all be together. We'd all flown places. And as the head of a business travel company, I would like to get back to that place. But I do think that this has opened up some new opportunities for us. And so entrepreneurship is alive and well. We've got a real opportunity to rethink the way that we recover this time around. And I think that that's both very optimistic about that, but it's not going to happen by accident. We're going to have to be very, very thoughtful about how we go about it and rethink everything from the way capital formation happens, the way our banks conduct themselves. I thought the story earlier of having to go to different banks, and that's still happening. That hasn't changed. And so we're going to have to really think differently.
I'm going to hold you there, Scott. Thank you. I'm going to bring us a couple of people. Thank you for that perspective. I'm going to bring Sammy in briefly. Sammy, you are the Director of Knowledge Creation and Research at the Kauffman Foundation. You have spent your career studying entrepreneurship and economic development and the impacts of it. You've been convening conversations with researchers, scientists around the globe over the last 6 months. What's the data and research telling us briefly about the impacts of 2020 on entrepreneurship?
Thanks, Andy. So it's telling us a couple of things. I think the biggest takeaway from what we see in the data is that this is both a sprint and a marathon. It's not a choice. And so we see some really fascinating trends based on business age. And so there is some evidence in what we're seeing and hearing in our survey work that new businesses respond differently than older established businesses. And so there's some hope there in the way that we can think about how we actually act on new businesses. The other thing that I think the data is showing is that there are tremendous disparities in business owner experience. And so one of the things that we see from some of the COVID surveys that we've been doing is that business owners that have children under the age of 18 that are home, we see that that is being reported more among Black and Hispanic business owners. We also see that business owners that have had to self-quarantine due to exposure to COVID, for example, which is not something we often think about when we're thinking about, business survival. But quarantine due to exposure to COVID, we've seen higher numbers among Black business owners there as well. When we look at in the household of the business owner, we see that other adult members that had pay or hours reduced, that is reported at a much higher rate among Black business owners as well. And so one of the things that I think we're seeing is that when we're thinking about the business, what we really are thinking about is the business owner and the business owner sort of internal and external ecosystem to cope. And so the business response is going to be a function also of the owner's response. And that is coming across in a very clear way from our survey work.
That's fantastic. I'm going to bring in Luz here, and we're going to have to keep this moving at a clip. I am so excited to have all of you over for beverages at some point, and we can go deeper into it. Luz, you've spent your career thinking about the financial side of entrepreneurship. You're the CEO of Action's Opportunity Fund, thinking about how to bring capital to some of those underrepresented entrepreneurs. You just testified in Congress about it a couple days ago. What are you seeing from your vantage point in sort of how the current year, 2020, is impacting entrepreneurs and the state of where entrepreneurship is, particularly small businesses is what you focus on. How are small businesses faring from what you can see?
Yes, well, thank you, Andy. Glad to be here. So, I mean, there's a lot of research and a lot of the participants have already spoken about numbers. I mean, there's about 2.2 million businesses that closed between February and May. And of course, Black and Latinx and immigrant-owned businesses were the ones bearing the brunt of the pain. Small businesses are in peril. Homebase found that the recovery that began in April essentially has flatlined in August, with more than 20% of small businesses across the nation remaining shuttered. Small businesses with 50 employees or fewer lost nearly 18 million jobs between February and mid-April. That was about a 60% decline. And close to half of those jobs have returned as the states began to reopen, but then recovery stalled in mid-June. I think one of the things that we see amongst our almost 6,000 small business entrepreneurs is that there is an enormous amount of suffering and anxiety, but also there is an incredible perseverance, resourcefulness, grit, and hope. And many small businesses, as Scott was saying earlier, are doing what they can. They're pivoting, and many of them seem to be weathering the storm. I think the bigger question is, what is it going to take to rebuild their businesses, particularly given that we don't yet know how long or how deep this pandemic will last. I always like to put customers behind the data and the numbers because that's what we're here to talk about. I'm going to share, Maurice Brewster. He's an owner of Mosaic Global Transportation in Mountain View, California, where I reside. And his transportation company laid off 114 employees in March when the company saw contract canceled after canceled, conferences were canceled in the Bay Area. Last year, he did about $11 million in revenue, and he still generates cash by providing daily shuttles for the employees in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, including Facebook. But right now, he's only running 8 shuttles, down from 70. And he's surviving, right? But it's because you've got great donors and supporters that help organizations like ours, CDFIs, continue to provide capital and payment relief and payment forgiveness. So, entrepreneurs are resilient, and we all have a lot of faith. We all are going to get through this one together.
I appreciate sharing that story. I'm going to turn it over to Melissa to drop a couple questions here. We don't have a ton of time to wrap up this session, but I'm going to turn it over to Melissa.
Yeah, so I really want to say thank you to each of you. You're obviously great leaders and you're coming with great information. And Luz, I really appreciate that you were able to share something positive. Recognizing the world we live in, I want you to think in a tweet form. So 280 characters. We've heard the phrase make good out of a crisis, and we've seen that before. We certainly know that, it's an opportunity for people to be resilient. So if you had to tweet to an entrepreneur, to a local official, to an ecosystem builder, some words of encouragement, or more importantly, a recommendation, what would that be? And Scott, we'll start with you.
We are in for a longer road than you think, and we need to plan for it. You got to continue to be transparent with all your constituencies about what's really going on, deliver ownership, which is responsibility and authority to the people around you to get stuff done because it's going to change quickly. And then finally, you brought it up, resiliency. This is going to require us to roll with the punches for a longer time than most people are anticipating.
I appreciate that, and leave it to you to create a Twitter thread. So I appreciate that. Luz, what about you? What would you say?
This pandemic is a terrible thing, but you can use it to drive positive transformation. In the middle of every disruption is the best time to bring innovation. And I think that as leaders, we need to to really think about a couple of areas. We need to lead with moral authority. So we need to do what we say we're going to do. We need to be clear and concise. During crisis, people want certainty, and we cannot give them certainty, but we can give them clarity. We need to be realistic and reassuring, recognizing that we don't have all the answers, and acknowledge that, and say we've never faced something like this before, but together we're going to get through it. And importantly, we need to lead with empathy. When communicating with staff and team members during this time, it is critically important to lead with empathy, to strive for flexibility, and model ways to prioritize health and well-being for your team members and for yourself.
I appreciate that. And Sammy, I'm gonna ask you, I think all of us, I finally had to turn the news off because there was just nothing positive. Would love for you, as somebody who digs into the data, give us some positive stats that are some good things or some positive trends that we can at least think about building upon.
Yeah. I think this recovery is going to be about what we don't see and what we haven't seen for a long time. And so on the positive, I think, we see real differences between what new firms can do and what established firms can do. And so there is an opportunity to really look at, for example, the 6% of the adult population that really wants to start a business but hasn't. That's real promise. And 3 in 4 people are non-college graduates. That is something that we now know and we can act on. And so from my perspective, a lot of the reason that we ended up in this situation in the first place is we have neglected what we can't see. And we're not asking what isn't happening, who's not starting a business, who's not creating a job. And so that I think, sums it up in terms of where new firms can be really promising and where we can hone in and say, now we know we're missing the people that say they want to start a business and can't. And what can we do to get them off the ground?
What I hear you saying, Sammy, and what I hear of everyone is the untapped potential we're at right now is that we have an economy that is in a difficult, challenging point. But if we can unlock that untapped potential in folks, often that we maybe haven't considered as viable entrepreneurs, that we can help build a more inclusive society, but a more sustainable and economically successful society. We're gonna have to leave the conversation there. Sammy, Luz, Scott, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Melissa and I are gonna come back. We're gonna take a short break right now. And when we return, we're gonna dig now into the state of economic development with a roundtable with Jeff Finkel, who is the president and CEO of IEDC, and Lanier Richardson is going to join us from Rutgers University. Then we're going to chat with Steve Case. So before we go to break, throughout this show, we have asked you to submit videos that share stories of entrepreneurs in your communities and the efforts you're doing to build ecosystems in your communities. And we'll be sharing those throughout the event and into the breaks. So as we roll into this break, I want you to stretch your legs, get up, do a little yoga or meditation, and come back at 12 p.m. U.S. Central Time, which is in just in a little bit. But I want to send you out with our first story. This was submitted by Louisa Shepard about some of the efforts going on to build the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Memphis, Tennessee.
Do you want Memphis to grow? Yes or no? Do you believe that Memphis in its own right is investable? Yes or no?
Memphis, in terms of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, had a significant amount of gaps that needed to be filled to ensure that people had support from sort of the earliest stages of their idea all the way to the growth and sale of their companies.
What would it be like if we had 1,000 entrepreneurs running around Memphis, Tennessee, funded, excited, and supported? Would that be transformational? My answer to that is yes. My name is David Waddell, and I am currently the board chair for Epicenter.
My name is Leslie Smith. I work at Epicenter. We co-created a vision for what a thriving entrepreneurial community can look like in Memphis with our partners, with our entrepreneurs, with our funders, key stakeholders.
Epicenter is a very big idea that we could transform a community, a culture, a city through galvanizing and supporting and activating thousands of entrepreneurs.
Kicking it off, next level.
We work with over 40 partners in the community to directly engage with entrepreneurs. And so we think about how do we empower and engage them more in the system.
It used to be there was the medical startup community, there was the sort of high-tech startup community. They somewhat talked together once in a while. And then there was the non-tech startups. They weren't interacting at all with each other. And I think that integrated approach that Epicenter is bringing to it, where all entrepreneurs come together, and it's, I think, a pretty unique ecosystem that I've seen.
When you think about just how many people who are daily working with entrepreneurs, we believe our resources are best spent resourcing that work and elevating it in ways that they can serve more entrepreneurs, where we sit in service to that, but also help them fill the gaps.
So we came to Memphis with the Epicenter Logistics Accelerator program.
We were exposed to the network that they have, being able to talk to other entrepreneurs, trying to understand how they navigated things here.
There have been times when it's not even things are going poorly. It's just there's too much. When you get the right investors, they add so much value to your team, and they're so excited by what you're doing. They're backing you for a reason. It's not just because they're making money. It's because they love the thing. They're like, that is cool.
The ecosystem has been galvanized around the Epicenter and is better and healthier than it's been, but it's nothing compared to what it's going to be 5 years from now.
Our commitment to execute less means we're empowering our entrepreneurs to do their thing and not getting in the way of that. It's not just about a program, it's about an entire way of life, that entrepreneurs are important and that we must know who they are and we must seek them out and support them in all the ways we can, whatever that looks like.
And I'm here again. Caught my head in a place somewhere else in the stratosphere. How it came and went, but the thing I never knew is that all of the beauty is here.
I think as innovators, you have a choice. Like, you can be part of critiquing and hindsight what happened, or you have a chance just to be in front and say, you know what, every day I'm just going to try. I'm going to try my best.
We've prototyped face shields, hands-free door pulls. It's part of our mission, right?
The number one thing that we wanted to do was educate the caregivers on what to look for and how to prevent it and what steps they should do if they know or see symptoms.
Our technology converts carbon dioxide into alcohol, and we're now using all of the ethyl alcohol that we make to make a hand sanitizer. Most of the sanitizer is going to people like NYPD, hospitals like Mount Sinai in New York City.
The partnership we've built with Eastern Bank through Mass Challenge, through that partnership, we were asked to help power the public-facing portal of the Massachusetts State COVID Fund. They've raised over $20 million.
COVID Companion helps keeps communities engaged and educated by providing credible CDC resources, and even provides access to local public health resources if they don't have a primary care doctor. Startups don't have the luxury of waiting things out. That's not how we live or create value. You have to find ways to make it work.
I think it's just such a unique time where so many behaviors are changing and we don't really know where things are going to go. So to not be discouraged if something doesn't immediately take off, even though it's hard.
All of a sudden, our access to the world has been limited. Our access to each other has been limited. There's this really magical opportunity for all of us to build an empathy for what it means to have your life become severely limited.
This has just really shown us how connected the world is, that someone else's problem actually does affect all of us.
Sometimes in startups, everyone's wearing multiple hats and everyone can be spread thin, and when everyone's just focused on one mission, that's really powerful.
To those that are struggling, you're absolutely not alone.
Hello everyone and welcome to the home of your Kentucky State Champion Pikeville Panthers. It's homecoming right here in Pikeville, Kentucky, a city that has moved mountains.
Appalachia is a special place. I've been blessed to be able to live in the mountains. These people take pride in the culture and the great work ethic. They're faith-based, believe in family. That's what home's all about.
I'm a third-generation coal miner.
CSX regular low coal, 0.27 low coal.
My grandfather and dad both worked in the coal mines. It was like being in a whole other world, like nothing else I've ever seen. Working underground is probably one of the best experiences I ever had. Went to work just like any other day, and at the end of the shift, boss took us one by one into his office and said, "Don't need you anymore."
Lost a job I'd worked at for almost 7 years. Called my wife, told her, time's gonna be tough.
I'd worked 32 years. Suddenly I was in a place I'd never been before. At my age, it was pretty scary. The opportunities around here was basically coal mines. I mean, if you wanted anything else, you had to move away from home. At that time, my wife was pregnant, not being able to provide for my family. I didn't have any hope left.
He's not desiring that you sit there just frustrated and broken about your circumstances.
3 years ago, at the height of all the coal layoffs, we just couldn't accept that we couldn't do something else. Good to see you. Hi, neighbor. How you doing?
People here that lost their house, that lost their car, they were working for minimum wage. Our neighbors were suffering. That's my number one priority next. As people that had operated businesses here for years, Lynn and I, we wanted to find something where people could stay here in the mountains and earn a living that was equivalent to the one they earned in the mining industry.
Well, let me tell you just quickly the plan. Here's what we need to do.
Yeah. And so we started looking. We investigated agriculture. We looked at solar farms, wind farms, but nothing really worked here in these geographically bound mountains. We knew that a coal miner is just a tech worker that gets dirty. And so our big moment came when we learned about coding. We thought, hey, this might work.
That way you can see a timeline as well. I grew up in the area. I basically moved away because there was no tech opportunity in the mountains. I took a call from my cousin, Rusty, and he asked me, can you teach a coal miner how to code? So I thought, how are we going to do that? I guess I'm the only one that I know that speaks hillbilly and JavaScript.
We were going to get an export.
We also needed someone on the creative side. So we reached out to Peyton. He's a hometown boy. He can live and work anywhere, but he wanted to make a difference in this place.
We would like to do something. Our plan was to try to build a software development company right here in the mountains. We called it BitSource.
We thought we might get 50 applicants. We received 950 applications for just 10 positions.
When I got the job, didn't know anything about computers, didn't have an idea whether I'd be able to do it or not.
Here I was trying to teach them something that they knew nothing about. It's not fair to just give some people some false hope if we can't follow through and make this work.
All the naysayers kept saying, well, you can't train coal miners to be able to code. But hey, these guys have been working around tech their whole lives, and they're tough as nails. We can do this.
In the beginning, I started to teach them all the basics and how you talk with a computer. Then we use YouTube to fill in the rest.
In this lesson, we're going to take a look at what does the source code
all of the places in Drupal core, the code that makes up the format.
We just started and kept our heads down and worked every day to get better.
Let me show you where I'm at. I started to get excited that they were able to work through problems and complete projects.
Click yes. Good.
Well, before we knew it, these guys were talking in code.
I get a 403 forbidden back.
Mm-hmm.
But this ensures successful status code nukes that.
And now they're making websites, web tools, apps, and we're starting to get clients across the country.
Our session cookies expired.
As we continue to improve our skills, opportunities are coming our way. Still, we've got a lot of mountains to climb here.
I'm very proud that I've been able to learn something that I can pass down to my son, and hopefully he'll want to do it whenever he gets older.
What I'm hoping is that these original 10 could be the ones that help train another 10 or another 20 or another 100. Come on now, come on. And maybe this little endeavor one day make it where our kids and grandkids could stay here in this place called home.
I'd like to thank Jared Arnett for submitting that video. If you're interested in learning more about what's going on in Pikeville, Kentucky, you can visit and hear more about it tomorrow during our Ecosystem Builders Stories. But now, I want to keep us moving along to our next roundtable. We're actually going to explore the state of economic development. I'd like to welcome Melissa back into our conversation and then bring in Lanier and Jeff, who are coming to us from different parts of the U.S. We were anticipating that Penny Lewandowski would be able to join us today in this conversation, but we recently got the news that Penny was involved in a car accident and she's in the hospital. Before we get started with this, Jeff, can you just give us a little bit of an update on Penny? And I know you wanted to say a couple things.
So Penny Lewandowski, who was with the Edward Lowe Foundation and then retired from there and set up her own little consulting firm, was in a head-on collision on Labor Day. She lives in Grand Rapids, and she is at Spectrum Hospital. She underwent 3 surgeries, one on Monday, one on Tuesday, and one on Wednesday of last week. She has a very long way to go. She's alert. There does not appear to be any brain damage, but she's beat up pretty bad throughout the rest of her body, and her significant other, who was also in the car with her, I don't know how many ribs that we have, but he has 19 broken ribs, if I am correct, and some of them in multiple places. This was somebody that ran into them head on on a divided highway headed in the wrong direction. So we should all pray for Penny. It's not words I normally use, but I think she's going to be with us for the long haul. She just has a lot of repair to do. So thank you for raising that. Anybody who wants to send a card, send it to Penny Lewandowski in care of IEDC, our organization. We'll make sure they get to her. Our address is 734 15th Street Northwest, Suite 900, Washington, D.C. 20005. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, we'll get that added in. Let me just say Penny's been an incredibly important part of the ESHIP community since the first event, and she helped us actually recruit some folks for the first summit when we were just getting started. So my heart and my thoughts go out to Penny and her family. And Jeff, thanks for taking the opportunity to update us and keeping us informed on how things are going. I want to shift into our conversation at our roundtable now around the state of economic development. But to kind of make that transition, I actually want to start with you, Lanier. Lanier, you have been a key and important part of our community here around the ESHIP Summit since it began. That's how we met. I have become a huge fan of your work. You have been integral to the community. Before we jump into the state of economic development, can you just, we've got a lot of people that are joining us today. This is their first ESHIP Summit. This is everyone's first virtual interactive ESHIP Summit. But just given your past experience, do you have some advice for someone who's new to the ESHIP Summit community, and how can they make the most of the experience over the next couple of days?
Yeah. So I think of this as a potent and open source to a community of people passionate about supporting entrepreneurs. And I think of it as information, as inspiration, and as connections, right? Information's, the example I use is when I first came to ESHIP, I learned about community ecosystem builders who were focused on raising an angel fund in a rural community. And I remember thinking, like, they can get angel investors in a rural community. I should be able to do that in Newark, New Jersey. So it inspired me, and they connected me at ESHIP with a professional service provider who had formed over 30 angel funds around the country. And that became, we engaged that service provider, and we have since formed our own angel group. And from ESHIP, I've formed a number of great relationships. I partnered with Mark Lawrence down in Maryland, Maryland's Incubate on grant applications. I've been on panels with a number of the ESHIP community. So it's a great source of connection, again, from people who are just so passionate about the work. And please use this as that opportunity.
A call to action, just to remind people, up above in the menu, there's a connect button, and you can actually use that, because the value of this convening isn't just learning from Melissa and Lanier and Jeff and me, but it's actually engaging with each other, and we've tried to create the best virtual equivalent of that with this platform. Melissa, I'm going to turn it over to you to kick off our discussion about the state of economic development.
Yeah, no, so excited. I have such great respect for both of you gentlemen. Lanier, you named it. It's also a place that for a long time we've all been guaranteed to be able to connect. So it's great to have you. And Jeff, we haven't met, but I'm a huge fan of your work. I spent a significant amount of time in economic development, and I think there is this historical belief that the two don't oftentimes coincide. So I would love to, before we dive into that conversation, and you had Scott talk about the health crisis, the economic crisis, we have a climate crisis. Give us a sense of how 2020 has impacted your work, the communities you represent, and kind of the state of economic development as we know it, because we know everything is changing. I would love to hear it from your perspective.
So I think the first thing that, and I've been to a couple of the ESHIP summits as well, and I think there is a belief among some of the people that come to ESHIP is that economic developers aren't involved in entrepreneurship. And I first would like to disabuse anybody of that thought. Lanier was the city director for the economic development entity in Newark, New Jersey. And Lanier was all about entrepreneurship, as well as neighborhood redevelopment and large scale development and and recruitment of businesses to his community, and which is the case in most communities across the country. But the issues of the pandemic and what has happened to our economy are enormous, and how I mean, the word of 2020 is pivot. Whether we like that word or not, I think everybody has figured out how to pivot in some way. We immediately ran out a whole series of webinars. You can find them all on our website or another website that we maintain called restoreyoureconomy.org. Many of them had to deal with what was involved in the CARES Act. Where do you find money using CDBG, EDA? What do you do about your workforce? We've explored almost every possible issue around that as well. Our second pivot had to do with racism and economic development. I'm not sure the two of them had a lot to do with each other, but we ended up having to deal with the issues around Black Lives Matter, and Lanier and a number of our board members, Lanier happens to be on our IEDC's board, we created a statement about what was important to the economic development world at this point. And I think every economic development organization has figured out both some type of grant program, either using CARES Act money or existing resources, and technical assistance to assist small firms in one way or the other. I could go on a lot longer, but I would say those have been kind of the kickoff items that have been important to our field of 5,000 practitioners around the United States.
No, and that's awesome, and not surprising under your great leadership that those critical steps were taken. Lanier, let's expand on that for a second. As Jeff just spoke about some of the changes around just the race relations, and there's so much stuff going on. As somebody who's on the ground, what do you see as the role of economic development as kind of responding to this moment?
You know, I talk about this moment as the pandemic, the protests, and the political pandemonium, the PPP, right? All of that's palpable now.
I like
right?
that one.
Right? And what for me, it's empowered us to be more intentional and specific and unapologetic about inclusive economic development and growth. You know, positioning people of color to own, to drive growth, to, you know, look at where next economy opportunities are, and, you know, to encourage entrepreneurs to be problem solvers and to generate a profit by solving problems, right? You know, Michael Porter stuff, business solution to social problems. And so that's been the work right now. I always joke that when I first became an economic developer formally, as Jeff said, headed economic development in Newark, New Jersey, the first thing I did that month was really make an assessment of what power I had, right? Power to convene, being in the position, people would return my call, the mayor's office, the head of a corporation, the head of, you know, local philanthropic organization. So I had some resources, a couple $1 million of city money, some corporate capital, the ability to analyze and advocate, and in some respects, allocate capital, right? So how now, given the moment, can economic developers more intentionally use those powers and others to bring about more inclusive economic development, change systems, you know, provide more patient flexible capital, do credit enhancement, do what has traditionally been thought of as business retention, but to do small business support work in a more intentional, more direct, you know, keep businesses surviving and growing. You know, Penny was the first person who's not here, first person to introduce me to the whole concept of economic gardening. And I thought, well, I could do urban economic gardening, right? So that's what the moment really does for us right now. And there's a role for economic developers and entrepreneurs and the whole community of ecosystem builders to partner together to make our world better and to create more economic opportunities across the board.
And that's awesome. And I hope that folks will take you up on that charge. I'm actually sure some of it is already happening. But part of this, I want to go to you, Jeff. When we saw the video now which was amazing, they talked about the geographic boundaries, and obviously all of that is changing as we're even part of this ESHIP Summit virtually today. Talk a little bit about, you have over 5,000 members at IEDC, if not even more now. Talk about best practice or things you've seen around how do we break down those geographic boundaries? Because oftentimes they're physical, but they come with emotional and mental baggage in terms of being surrounded by and part of, what's happening there. And it gets a little hard to cross some of those. So besides using Zoom, what are some of the ways that you can see economic developers and entrepreneurs coming together beyond their own community to kind of really foster this global ecosystem that we're all a part of?
Well, it's interesting. I wished we could answer that question today and then answer that question in 18 months. Because I went to school in Appalachia. I went to Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, which is in southeastern Ohio. The head of the location of the most number of deaths from the crisis around drugs is in Huntington, West Virginia. And so there's been a lot going on in Appalachia, and it has probably inhibited our ability to get investment in some of those places. However, after New York City got hit by the corona or the COVID-19 crisis in the way they did, and when many people realized that their companies would allow them to work virtually, and that we all discovered, whether we had used Zoom or not before March, we've discovered new ways of working together or across platforms that may open up borders in ways that we don't appreciate right now. My offices are in downtown Washington, D.C. We have not been into that office since March on a collective basis. Do we need as much office space in the future? Can one of my staff work from North Carolina or Tennessee or Kentucky or inner city Queens? And I think that's the question that we all will be asking ourselves. And will we be able to build a supplier network where we talk to each other using Zoom or these other platforms? That's the best I can do on this question at this point.
Jeff, because you mentioned, in 18 months, come back to us. You all are working on some specific programming to support folks in economic development who support entrepreneurs. Can you speak to that just very briefly? We were hoping to have Penny on to talk more about it, but can you just give us a high-level overview of what you're working on and people can perhaps follow up?
Absolutely. And Andy, you guys are assisting in the funding of it. We also got a little money from the Denver region of the Economic Development Administration. But we are in the process of creating a new certification for economic developers and others who focus and support entrepreneurs. This will not be how to be an entrepreneur. This will be how to support an entrepreneur. And it will range in any number of things from, Lanier was talking about venture capital or how do you use the SBA 504 or 7A? How do you use CDBG funds, various state programs? It will be a whole series of courses followed by a test of some sort and a certification. And thank you for asking, Andy.
Excited about is, and you know this, but your colleague Swati is going to be joining us on the 29th, the third day of the ESHIP Summit, which is really about the growing professional field of ecosystem building. So the things that support ecosystem builders, not just because today we're talking about what do you do in your community. Swati's going to join us with Kate Hodel and Maria Myers, who are working on that as well. They're from SourceLink, and they're going to share more about kind of the early stage and the early thinking of that IEDC certification on entrepreneur-led economic development. So excited to have that conversation. We're going to have to wrap up here shortly. Melissa, I'm going to give you the last wrap-up question, and we got to keep it tight because we got to keep the show rolling, as they say.
All right. So I'm going to try and I'm going to ask each of you one recommendation. We talk a lot about, and we saw in that video around generations. What's one recommendation that you have for entrepreneurs, economic developers, policy people that we need to implement right now so that we can make sure that it's sustainable beyond at least 2 generations, so we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel? One recommendation we all do right now. Lanier?
Work on structuring more patient, flexible, equity-like capital funds. If we're going to change the systems, if we're going to do capitalism different and better so that it works for more of us, close income, deal with issues like income inequality and racial wealth gap, we need new financial tools. And patient flexible equity is what I'd recommend we start with.
I like it. And Jeff, what about you? One recommendation.
Well, I'm not going to be completely on target for your question. My answer is there are going to be a lot of entrepreneurs that are going to lose their businesses during this post-pandemic, this economic recession we're in. Many entrepreneurs have lost businesses before. How do we get them re-engaged back into a new business and creating jobs and not leave them behind as this economy eventually recovers?
I love that. That's a great recommendation. Focus on those who are closed, or more importantly, don't give up on those who are closed. I had that conversation the other day that closed needs to be in air quotes because it can be relative for every single entrepreneur. And I think with Lanier's Capital, some of those can for sure reopen. Thank you both. I appreciate it. Andy?
Much, Melissa, Jeff, Lanier, for joining us. Appreciate you taking the time. Thinking about Jeff's final comment there, one of the key elements of building entrepreneurial ecosystems, we call it principle number 1, which is putting entrepreneurs front and center. So getting out, talking to your entrepreneurs, especially those impacted by COVID-19, and ask them how you can help. And then whatever they say, help them. That's great advice, Jeff. Now I want to hear from you. We're going to roll out another one of our sort of polls. So find the poll tab if you're inside of our platform. If you're outside on Twitter, you can use hashtag ESHIP Summit. Thinking about what we've talked about over the last almost hour and 15 minutes, the question is how much is entrepreneurship valued in your community at the present moment? I'm very curious. So rate that in the poll question from 1 to 5, 5 being highly valued, 1 being less than highly valued. But 1 through 5, how supportive do you feel your community is for entrepreneurs? As you often heard throughout the conversations, both conversations we have already had, efforts